Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya joins us now. Adefemi, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Now,
to you all.
Well, that was an excellent report, by the way. Would you say that Hungary has been more accommodating when it comes to dealing with African refugees that are fleeing the crisis going on in Ukraine?
If we think about a case-by-case analysis, if we compare Hungary's response to a country like Slovakia, for example, it would be quite different because Hungary has a Nigerian embassy. Hungary has a huge Nigerian community here in Budapest, so it has been easier, especially for people who have been fleeing Ukraine later on in this conflict, to get to countries like Hungary for assistance. If we compare that to Poland, for example, that was definitely one of the major crossing points in the very early days of this conflict for Africans, because depending on where they were, that was the closest to them. But the later this war has continued, it changes the trajectory of the evacuation process out of Ukraine. So what we're seeing now is more and more people opting to come to Hungary via train once they arrive into the Hungarian city of Zauni. What happens in Zauni is that it's almost a common meeting place for people who've crossed through the many borders Hungary has with Ukraine and other countries. So they will all collectively meet in Zauni and then get onto the trains which will bring them into Budapest. And here in Budapest, as was the case of this morning, we did have representatives from the Redeemed Church on ground, and also Ambassador Igina Aina, who has also been on the ground these past couple of days across Eastern Europe, actually, as it pertains to making sure that African and Nigerian students are well taken care of. But in terms of the response itself too, you heard the pastor there say that he can only accommodate refugees for upwards of 2 days. They're given information, counsel, food, and a place to sleep. But ultimately, after 2 days, once again, choices and resources are limited. And that's where the Nigerian ambassador to Hungary comes in. I have been able to talk to her on the phone. We've been in contact throughout the day, and it's expected that more and more evacuees from places like Sumy, but definitely Ukraine in general, will continue to arrive throughout the day here in Hungary. Later on in the evening should be the expected arrival for the next group of Nigerian and African evacuees, and it's believed that at those arrival points, the Nigerian embassy is expected to be on ground and will take evacuees who want to go into hostels in downtown Budapest, I'm told, some 20 to 30 minutes away. So that is what the initial plan has been, according to the Nigerian embassy here in Hungary. But that obviously is subject to what we find, what will be found once these evacuees continue reaching Budapest.
Well, talking about the Nigerian evacuees, Adefemi, what has their experience been like, finding their way to Hungary? And then what are their plans? Are they planning, to also return back to Nigeria, or do they have other plans?
Fleeing war is tough. And that has been what we've been hearing from everybody who's chosen to talk to us, whether that's on or off camera. It has been very tough for everybody getting out of this war safely. That's just it. So when you look at the options people may have, especially if they're from more obscure communities in comparison to them not being originally from Europe, for example, options are there. So you do have the option to return to Nigeria should more evacuation flights be announced, and that is likely to be the case, as we're hearing to be the case this weekend. An evacuation flight, it's believed, is in the process for this weekend. But then there's still the issue of many African and Nigerian, especially evacuees who do not want to return home, not because they have an outwardly negative feeling when it comes to Nigeria, but because when it comes to their education, they definitely want to return to Ukraine. And that's been the consensus usually when it comes to the refugee crisis as a whole. More and more people are, of course, fleeing for their lives, fleeing the war in Ukraine. But it's believed that should war end, a lot of these refugees will return back to Ukraine. And that has definitely been the consensus when it comes to the students that I've been talking to in their plans. Now, it might be naive to believe that this war or conflict will end in the coming days. It may not. Nobody knows for sure. But what we do know is that many people are hoping to wait this war out so that they can return home. And when it comes to some Nigerians, when they say home, they actually mean Ukraine.
Wow. And Femi, you've been doing quite a bunch of very good reports, and we know some of the individuals now. I just wanted to follow up on the medical students, whether or not you'd heard anything back from them, and also those students, I think they were in Warsaw, or the ambassador was looking for some remaining African students who might have crossed the border. Any follow-up from that?
For the situation in Medica, it seems as though, as it pertains to Nigerian refugees who are students or migrant workers, it is believed that the vast majority of them have already crossed into Eastern European countries. And as has been the case since we went there for those 2 days, 3 days actually, we weren't able to see many Nigerian students or Nigerian migrants. What we did see across those 3 days were 2 Nigerian men, both of them in international, interracial relationships, who had called Ukraine home for years. And so that could be a reason why it took them slightly longer to continue their progression towards Ukraine's borders into countries like Poland and Slovakia. But for many of the people that I've spoken to over the course of our time across Eastern Europe, when I think of Williams and Victory, it's starting to become quite a desperate situation for them. Our last update was that they had crossed successfully into France, and while they were grateful, it seems as though that feeling has worn off. They do say that it's been quite difficult for them to manage themselves financially in France, and because of that, it's unlikely that the rest of their friends will come over to France to meet them. Last I heard, which was yesterday evening, Victory was telling me that it's believed that their friends are now no longer going to come to France and will go to Germany instead. Germany continues to be a source of motivation for a lot of African and Nigerian refugees who are looking for a host country, but especially one where they will be allowed to continue their studies. And it's believed that Germany continues to be the destination of choice for a lot of students wanting to stay in Europe and continue on in their studies.
Now, Adefemi, speaking of studies, for the Nigerians who may decide to actually return to Nigeria, I heard in your report about the lady who was talking about speaking to some universities if they would consider, scholarship options. Has there been any response on the part of those universities that she's reached out to so that it would be easy to resettle these returnees?
Simply put, no. Because while the idea is there aren't many formal confirmations, and because of that, students who are already reluctant to return to Nigeria because they want to continue their studies are unlikely to do so because they think there may be the prospect of a private university, Covenant Bells, a university offering them some sort of discounted admission fee or tuition fee as it pertains to whether or not they'll decide to go back home. But for evacuees who have already crossed into Nigeria, that is obviously going to be a viable option. But at this point, it's unclear whether or not that process has formally begun or whether or not, as you heard Olashubomi Iginla Ayina discuss, that it's something that many people who are displaced in Nigeria displaced in Europe rather, are still quite concerned about. And for those who are already in Nigeria, it is definitely an option if they are eager to continue on their studies while this war in Ukraine continues.
Well, Arise Correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Please stay safe.